noise. I don't know what that was. Welcome to Textory. If you don't know what Textory is, how dare you? Get out. It's a podcast about history, basically. We are reading historical texts, and we are always trying to find a connection between the past and the present. And most often than not, that connection is very visible, very visible. Today's episode is just going to be very chill. I feel like we've been through a lot of controversy. This one is just very homely. Pun not intended, because we are literally going to talk about Victorian homes. So today we are time traveling to the end of the Victorian era. 1897 is where our text is from. Before we jump into it, do remember that I have a Patreon related to the podcast. So if you do enjoy the podcast, if you want it to keep coming out, please support me on patreon.com/textory. I am sharing texts that did not maybe make it into the podcast. I am sharing fun things. So go and check that out. Back to the podcast now. As I said, end of the Victorian era. Stylistically, it was, I would say, a very stylized period, so everything was very ornamented, which some consider kitsch. I personally find it very pleasant, as long as it's not overdone, because sometimes you see images of Victorian houses, Victorian interiors, and you're just like, wow, that will actually drive me insane, because they're just overpacked with trinkets, paintings, furniture, everything is just very opulent, and not in a rich way. It's not like Rococo. It's more like hoarder vibe. People would just put a lot of stuff in one room. That's all I'm gonna say. But also by that time, Art Nouveau was slowly sneaking into architecture, into interiors, into clothing. And to me, Art Nouveau was an attempt to really get out of that rut. Prior to Art Nouveau, art has stalled quite a bit. Academia was very highbrow. It was very conservative. Classicism was in, both in fine arts and architecture. Things were just beginning to be a little boring. And that is when the first Art Nouveau style buildings started appearing around mid-1890s. And people were a little torn about whether they like it or not, but a lot of people just welcomed those buildings, those art directions, let's say, as sort of a breath of fresh air. And artists who endorsed the Art Nouveau style, they argued, and this is a thought that was already sort of in public discourse for years, thanks to the likes of William Morris, that we don't really need a distinction between fine arts, such as paintings, such as sculptures, and applied arts. So stuff we have at home, textiles, furniture, ceramics, everything we use every day. Both should be beautiful and pleasing to the eye. So basically everything deserves to be art. And that covered things like posters and ads, things that prior to that period were maybe not getting that much attention because it mostly just focused on typography. Around Art Nouveau, they really outdid themselves with basically design. I think it was like a birth of public space design. Or not birth, but it really grew at that time. Here are some thoughts that architect Eugène-Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc had on the matter. Function should define form. He also proposed unity of the arts and the abolition of any distinction between major art, architecture, and minor arts, so decorative arts. Nature's logic is the model to be used for architecture. It really shows in Art Nouveau buildings because a lot of them draw inspiration from nature, not only in, let's say, the construction, but also creatively. There is a lot of nature-inspired ornaments. And then architecture should adapt itself to man's environment and needs. So it goes like both ways. We both adapt art to daily use and public spaces, but also the first function of it should be what people need from it. And then use of modern technologies and materials. So Art Nouveau was a little bit more forward in terms of adapting new techniques. And the proper boom of the Art Nouveau style happened around the year 1900 with the World Exposition in Paris, which attracted nearly 50 million visitors. If you don't know, the World Exposition in Paris, or the World Exposition in general, was like international fair where different countries were basically showing off their latest achievements. But today, as I said, we're time traveling 3 years prior to the year 1900, so 1897, because it all sounds good in theory, but what did an actual regular person have in common with the Art Nouveau style? And apart from maybe getting their hands on a fashionable dress, not much. However, there was one area of life that remained sort of a platform for people that wanted to participate in the whole movement. And that is, of course, decorating your own home. Everyone had a space they lived in. A lot of people did not have access to actual expensive pieces or even be able to decorate their space in any way, but people still did it. I mean, more often than not, the beautiful Tiffany-style lamps and the metalwork staircases that we see in Art Nouveau buildings were simply a dream, and people had to be more pragmatic about what they can and can't do in their house. But I still think, obviously, the aesthetics of the era were a massive factor in how people thought about the spaces that they lived in. When I was decorating my own flat, I realized that I have a lot of really great ideas, but some of them exceed my budget, so I don't think they're ever going to happen. And according to today's text, because I have kept you guys waiting for so long trying to guess what the text is, I was not the only one, because we are reading Handbook of Housekeeping on a Small Income. Mind you, if you think a small income is, let's say, someone of a lower class, not really. From the book, I gather that they meant someone from maybe impoverished upper class or a well-off working class person, and you'll see why in a minute, so let's jump into it. To furnish in haste and repent at leisure is sometimes the fate of inexperienced young people starting a home of their own. And such repentance may entail much heart-burning recrimination and discomfort, and be the fruitful manufacturer of an unlimited supply of family jars. I'm laughing because we have this saying in Polish, when someone moves out from their hometown and goes to a bigger city, they're called a jar because their family would just not stop giving them food. And I wonder if that was already a phrase they used back then. The less money one has in hand for furnishing, the more consideration is required for its profitable outlay. Furnishing is a costly business. And it is extraordinary how little can be bought towards furnishing a house comfortably with £100. Okay, a quick Google search, 1897, £100 to today. That's £16,000, which equals $21,000. For decorating one's house, that's a pretty good budget, I would say. But maybe back then, everything was much more expensive because it was hand-produced, most of it. It must be remembered that besides the chairs and tables, bedsteads and wardrobes, mirrors and pictures, cabinets and bookcases, sideboards and sofas, which are the large items that are chiefly thought of when house furnishing is contemplated, there are all sorts of unconsidered trifles, which are indispensable to comfort and which must be provided. This is a pretty decent list of the type of furniture that was important to Victorians, I think. And if anyone was trying to decorate their house in Victorian style, this episode is for you guys, because there is just so many details, much more than when you just look at a photo of a house, that will tell you exactly what they wanted in their interiors. And here's another whole list, so get your notebook out. Carpets and oilcloth, curtains and blinds, fenders and fire irons, curtain poles, stair carpets, washstands and their belongings, bed and table linen, blankets and counterpanes, towels and dusters, crockery, cutlery and glass, cooking utensils, hot water cans, baths, Coal scuttles, brooms, brushes, candlesticks, lamps, pails, tubs, knives and forks, trays, and kitchen furniture are all needed in houses of the most modest pretensions. And a considerable margin must be left for them, as the purchase of all these things comes to a very alarming sum if their cost has not been carefully calculated and allowed for beforehand. This is actually crazy. That's so many things. But I'm also thinking a lot of those things, a lot of those items were needed simply because they did not have the household technology that we possess nowadays. So you would not need coal scuttles and brooms and brushes and all that stuff if you simply had a vacuum cleaner back then. A lot of the cooking stuff would not be necessary because you would just have a mixer or a rice cooker. I don't know. I'm just thinking I never really paid attention to that. And I never thought about old homes needing much more items and much more things simply because they did not have the machines that we have. And that's very interesting. For this reason, it is well not to spend straight away all the money allotted for furnishing, but to wait till housekeeping actually begins and some experience is gained. It is especially necessary in the selection of furniture to bear in mind a point which, in this connection, is often forgotten. For example, the number of servants to be kept. That's where I'm kind of like, oh, okay, you and we're not the same. Because if someone is on a small income and they're wondering about the number of servants to be kept, that's still like a completely different story than someone on a small income today. However, obviously, staff back then was much cheaper, which is not a good thing. But I think it's similar to how today a person, let's say in East Asia, that employs staff is not necessarily rich because it's culturally just a normal thing to do. Some sorts of furniture take much more time and trouble to keep clean than other kinds. For instance, dining room chairs with intricately carved frames and buttoned seats will take a great deal of time to clean. This is something that a lot of people complain about, that things that are highly decorative are difficult to clean. And I'm always like, joke's on you, I'm not cleaning this anyway. Like, I remember a lady that was helping me with like choosing the right wardrobe for my bedroom, and she was like, well, we recommend the wardrobes to reach like all the way to the ceiling because it's going to accumulate dust and it's going to be difficult to clean. And I was just thinking, like, why would I ever clean the top of my wardrobe? Okay, am I dirty? Anyway, if only a cook and house parlor maid are kept, it will be a great addition to their multifarious duties to be obliged to devote attention to furniture of this description, and more often than not, they will neglect it. Unless there are a sufficient number of servants to do the cleaning thoroughly and properly, it is infinitely wiser to choose plainer articles, which do not require a vast expenditure of time to keep them in nice order. Big mirrors, elaborate draperies, ornate electroplated table requisites should all be avoided by those who have only 1 or 2 servants. I mean, it makes sense a little bit. Similarly to do not buy a massive house if you're not going to be able to clean it. But at the same time, I'm thinking it's also about your house not being just a place that you live in, but being a space that is judged by other people, because obviously Victorians were all about having guests all the time and then having people stay with you for extended periods of time. And it's probably not just about keeping your house clean for yourself, but it's about keeping up the appearances. So if you had a big mirror, it had to be clean because people will judge you if it was not. Great care should be exercised in buying second-hand upholstered articles, as they may be infested in the folds with moth, or even more to be dreaded pests. I mean, that's a solid advice that is still applicable to modern-day second-hand furniture buying. Bedrooms. With regard to the furnishing of bedrooms, it ought never to be forgotten that in the bedroom we spend at least 1/3 of our lives. Therefore, it is extremely important that the bedroom should be a healthy room. To this end, every bedroom should have a fireplace with an unclosed register. It should also have a window or windows opening top and bottom, which is necessary for efficient ventilation, and be furnished in a way that will allow of its being easily kept clean. I have a question for English people and Americans, because I don't know if I've seen it anywhere else. When you have those windows that just like slide up, how the hell do you wash the outside window? There is no way to open it to the inside of the house. How do you wash it, especially if you live on like a top floor? Please do let me know. There is a special reason for this latter, so for easily keeping clean the window, which many people forget when they furnish their bedrooms. It is that the bedroom is always liable to become a sick room if the occupier of it should fall ill. It should not have a carpet nailed down all over the floor. Our British people listening right now, do not nail a carpet down all over the floor. But also it's a little bit sad that they actually had to consider, I mean, it's a thing that everyone should consider even nowadays because everyone can have health problems at any time. But I think it was present in their minds a lot more often and basically all the time that what if I get really sick? Because a lot of people did, and it wasn't very rare. A healthy bedroom should have its floor either parqueted, painted, simply stained, or its boards merely scrubbed white and clean. And over this rugs, mats, or squares of carpet should be laid. Okay, so I'm assuming they didn't want the carpet nailed down because it made it difficult to clean, but carpet otherwise is fine, which I kind of agree with. There is one item of bedroom furniture upon which it is unwise to be parsimonious in the purchase, and that is the bedding. One of the greatest luxuries in life, and the one which people should least grudge themselves, is a good bed. Proper rest and good sleep contribute to longevity. 100% agreed. The spare room. In furnishing a room to be specially reserved for visitors, a pretty table supplied with writing materials, an ink bottle full, and a blotter with blotting paper in it should always be provided. It is the greatest convenience to many people to be able to write their letters in the quietness and privacy of their bedrooms. I never actually thought about this, that if you were visiting someone, it was like courtesy to give them writing materials because it was a given that they're gonna want to write letters to their loved ones and to their friends. And again, it also came down to the fact that people were staying at each other's places for so long that they were there long enough to actually keep correspondence. But in this case, the spare room was not a room for someone that was just coming over for the weekend, but it was most likely for a relative or a friend that would just visit you and then stay like 2 months. The drawing room. This room ought to reflect the tastes of the mistress of the house. There is no necessity, therefore, for describing how it should be furnished, as tastes differ almost as much as faces. What is that comparison? It will be well, however, to remember that cleanliness is as necessary in a nice drawing room as pretty furniture, and that dusting knickknacks, washing china, and arranging flowers occupies a great deal of time. There are 3 things to be avoided by anyone who wishes to be the possessor of a drawing room with even the smallest pretension to being furnished with good taste. 1. Common china ornaments. 2. Oleographs and pictures in cheap gilt frames, and large pictures of all kinds that are not really good. 3. Artificial flowers of every description, stuffed birds, and all such things under glass shades. These are utterly abominable, and at once demonstrate the owners of the room to be quite devoid of any sense of the aesthetic in their ideas of furnishing. I think I have all of them. I have like Chinese style vases. I have cheaply framed pictures that I just printed out and large pictures that are not really good. Maybe I don't have those. I do have artificial flowers. I think I have a stuffed bird. I once bought like a fake raven for a video. The only thing is I don't keep them under glass shades. So according to Victorians, my house is in bad taste. The dining room. If the house only contains drawing and dining rooms, the dining room should contain, along with the furniture specially required in it, so sideboard, dinner table, dinner wagon, and chairs, a couple of good easy chairs and a writing table, because the room will have to be used very often as a sitting room and study, as well as a room merely for meals. The more substantial the furniture of the dining room is, the better. I mean, this is solid advice. If you're going to spend more time in your dining room, you might as well style it as just a nice room because it's not just going to be used for dinners. Morning room or study or smoking room. Any small room can be used for these purposes, and such a room where work, writing, cutting out, smoking, etc. can be indulged in at all sorts of times and seasons is a great comfort. I mean, a morning room honestly sounds cool because if I knew that I have a special room where I could spend my mornings, I could probably wake up a little earlier than I do nowadays. The hall. Cheap oilcloth should never be used for hall or passages. It soon wears into holes. Linoleum is very durable. If a good quality is bought and properly washed, it will last for a long time looking well. The best kind for a hall is that with a pattern to represent tiles. This looks very well if of a bold design and good coloring, and its cost will be repaid by the good effect it imparts to the house on entering. I wonder how sturdy Victorian linoleum was, considering it was like early rubber. I wonder if it actually lasted as long as they say. The kitchen. Okay, this one's gonna be... this one's just gonna be detailed. So if you're still planning to decorate your house in a Victorian way, prepare a pencil and a piece of paper because there's going to be a whole list coming up soon. The cost of furnishing the kitchen must be carefully calculated by young people who are endeavoring to furnish on a limited sum, very especially when the limit is a narrow one. The utensils required in cooking and household work cost a good deal, and it will be surprising to the inexperienced to find how many of them are needed in an establishment conducted even on the most modest scale. It is very false economy to buy the cheapest cooking utensils because they soon wear out and new ones will have to be bought, as very cheap pots and pans won't stand much repairing. I mean, that's solid advice. We then have a whole list of things that we will need in a kitchen. And it's long, but I'm gonna read it. 2 baking tins, 1 basting spoon, basins for pudding, 1 bread grater, bread pan and cover, boiling pot, brushes for scrubbing, brushes for stairs, candlestick, corkscrew, Dutch oven, dustpan, egg whisk, flat irons, rest for irons, flour dredger, fish kettle, frying pan, gridiron, half sieves, 2 iron spoons, kettles, knife basket, rolling pin, saucepans. A set of 4 wrought iron saucepans bought at a good ironmonger's would cost about £1 10 shillings. Again, how much was that? £1 in 1897 to today. Oh my god, that's £166. So $220. Okay, but that's like for 4 saucepans, iron saucepans at that. So that makes more sense. Skewers, slice, spoons, strainer, steamer to fit saucepan, stew pan, sweeping brush, sweeps brush, scales, teapot, tea tray. There is more, but I'm gonna stop here. I didn't read all the prices either. Kitchen utensils in good condition can sometimes be bought very cheap at second-hand shops. This is the second time they mention second-hand shops, and I find it really interesting because we tend to think that it's a modern thing, but they did recycle a lot. As you can see, it was not something embarrassing. It was just resourceful, so people just did that. If anything was good quality, they bought it secondhand and no one batted an eye. A refrigerator is another luxury which greatly tends to the economy and comfort of a household. In it, all sorts of food articles can be kept in hot weather for a much longer time than in any larder or pantry. Therefore, if the purse's limit does not actually forbid its purchase, it will be found an economy in the end to provide the house with this useful addition to its housekeeping requisites. I was like, okay, did fridges already exist in the 19th century? Were they like commonly used? I find it interesting that they even mentioned that because A, the electric refrigerators were not invented until the 20th century, but also B, even the early fridges, early designs that were working with compressed gases were not very common. So I find it interesting that they bring it up as if it was like a thing that you were just like going to a shop to buy, which must have been the case because otherwise, why would they even talk about it? That must have already been considered a product that you could genuinely get somewhere and use. Okay, for the very end of this, let's read some general notes on furnishing. These are just very random comments that they made. Blankets should be all wool, which is something I think we can still benefit from today, but the cheaper kinds are mixed with cotton, which makes them heavier but not so warm, and they do not last nearly so long, and therefore are dearer in the end. It's kind of sad because when I read blankets should all be wool, I immediately thought because we don't like polyester and it doesn't keep you warm or it overheats you for no reason. But no, they actually meant wool mixed with cotton is worse than pure wool, which I only could wish that was the case nowadays. I don't know if you guys noticed, but less and less things are actually made of wool or cotton. And I mean, like, even 10 years ago, I used to buy socks and they were at least, like, let's say 60, 80% cotton. And it was not marketed as a luxury item. Now I go to the same shop and it's just 100% plastic. Who wants to wear plastic socks? What is happening? Anyway, next general note on furnishing says, furniture of polished hardwoods, mahogany, walnut, ash, etc. looks, lasts, and cleans much better than wood that is merely painted or enameled. That's interesting because I don't think that is the consensus nowadays. I mean, we do polish our furniture, but also 90% of my antiques are covered in some sort of see-through layer. And then another advice says, house linen is an important item in furnishing. The best is the cheapest in the end, as a good supply of first-class linen will, with care, last more than half a lifetime. But many people have to consider what is cheapest in the beginning, not in the end. I think that's the general vibe I'm getting from all this advice is if you invest in something more expensive now, you will eventually save more money over the course of the next years or decades. And I think that resonates with me, but also nowadays it's nearly impossible to adhere to that rule because we have so much cheap stuff around and it's so much easier to just buy the cheap stuff. And then maybe as years go on, invest in the good quality stuff because it's still better than just not having it. For example, I had a couple of things that I had in mind and I knew they're going to be pricey. So for the time being, I just bought the cheap versions of them. 2 years on, I managed to buy the more expensive ones. So I think it was much easier to achieve in a world where you didn't really have other options because it was not like the difference in pricing was that grand. You could just go without something or invest in something expensive because you knew at the end of the day it's going to last you years or decades. Whereas nowadays, if it's not something vintage, I don't have any faith in my household items because they're just not made to last. And that's the sad truth. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about these tips on decorating your house on a budget, basically, and how big of a budget that is. I mean, that's a lot of things. That's not what I would call on a budget at all. But I assume in a society like the Victorian society, it was absolutely imperative to have all these because, as you noticed, the kitchen was the most important part of the house because that was where the food came from and the food was then served to the guests. So you obviously wanted your guests to be well fed and impressed by your cook's skills. But it's interesting how much attention they gave to their kitchens because nowadays I don't think we really care. I mean, even if someone likes cooking, they're not going to make the kitchen the central point of the house. I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't actually like cooking, so what do I know? Do let me know in the comments, and a reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/techstory that you can check out. Thank you and bye.